Okay. Some people may have been in the service yesterday saying, well, I just don't understand why you're putting all these dates out there. And you don't have to learn dates. You don't have to memorize chapter and verse. But at some point, everything comes together and you see God's incredible hand in everything. I could go as far back. Tell me how far you want to go back. We can go back that far. When I started originally in this study, I thought, well, I'll reach back to where the kingdoms divide at the death of Solomon. Why? Because that was foretold in 1 Kings 11. It was foretold to Solomon that the kingdoms would be rent, that he would be spared this for David, his father's sake, but that this would happen. And we know that it happened, that at the death of Solomon, when the kingdoms did split, just as what was said in 1 Kings, and we have the north and the south, and the reign of the north and the southern, or the northern and the southern kingdoms of Israel and Judah, and the kings, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and you can descend all the way down. You can line all the kings up. I did that because I thought, well, that would be helpful for some, because if you're reading, sometimes you read this king and who's that one. But then when I got to the bottom, I realized, well, you could line all of that up yourself. What's really important is to understand these two cutoff points in their respective history. In 722, the carrying away of Israel by the Assyrian force, by the Assyrian army, and in 586, the fall of Jerusalem and the final carrying away of the people into Babylon. And of course, what we're looking at has to do with Judah, not Israel, and the return of the people, specifically chronicled in that dimension, although once you take off following the Assyrian captivity, that leads you into so many different directions. So I don't want to go in that direction. I want to try and stay focused so we can put some of these things in order. And that's important because once you get comfortable enough of knowing, for example, I pointed this out last week, I think, about Jeconiah, who is Coniah, who is also known by, I believe, 2 other names in Scripture. But if you weren't sure, you might think, well, are these different people? And I never want to take for granted that, oh, well, you've been around, you know this, because in discussing the Bible with many people, I realize that there are many things we just take for granted. So, what I want to show tonight is a little bit of putting things in order. I'm not going to get everything done that I want to get done tonight, so I just settled it. We'll just do a little bit tonight, and we'll just kind of peel away at this, just so it's not too overwhelming. So let's start first with what I've been talking about, which is the prophecies that were foretold of Cyrus by Isaiah. And we read those, Isaiah 41, Isaiah 44, and Isaiah 45 specifically. There are other references that are tucked in regarding the Persians, the Medes, the Medo-Persians. There's other references from the north, but the specific ones and the most important ones, Isaiah 41, 44, and 45. And these would have happened at least, minimally, 150 years before Cyrus was born. Now here begins the difficulty. If somebody says, well, do we know when Cyrus was born? That's a kind of difficult date, which is why when I wrote down in the message, I wrote the year that we're certain that he became king and that he reigned. And we're not talking at this moment about Babylon because that comes much later. But I said 559 is a good place to start with Cyrus. And we can say we know absolutely he died in 530 BC. Now, why is this important? It's not only important to the study we're doing, but if you listen to the teaching that Dr. Scott did out of Daniel, It just backs up everything that was taught in Daniel. It will help us in a future time when I teach out of Daniel and when I teach out of Revelation. There'll be many things where once the pattern is set, it does not change. So having these things crystallize and come together makes it much easier to present the information. That's kind of like the next layer of information that has to be put down. So we have another problem which I think a lot of people wrestle with, which is if you're reading, some people have said, well, Darius is a problem because which Darius is this? And I alluded to this last week and I put it in my mind that I would sit down here and I would straighten this out for those people that wrestle with this, which Darius? Because if you're reading Daniel, there is a Darius mentioned in Daniel, which is not the same Darius that is being mentioned in the records of Ezra and Nehemiah, and we need to get that straight. And in the chronology of things, this is what kind of helps us to understand. So if we're talking about Cyrus, we know that Cyrus will conquer many territories. He's kind of conquering as much as he can. His son, the next ruler that we know of in his line that is a legitimate ruler, Cambyses, will capture a little bit more territory in preparation for the time when Alexander the Great comes on the scene, and all of that territory that was already taken will be absorbed by Alexander the Great, and then possibly a little bit more, extending the kingdom to the largest territory taken by a single ruler or individual, Alexander the Great. So, but that's much later. So what I want to point out first is if we have Cyrus, and we know we have a hard date for his death, we know that, then I want to point out the difference between the Darius that is mentioned in Daniel and the Darius that's mentioned in Ezra and Nehemiah. So the first thing I want you to do is turn to Daniel. And if you already know this, then it's just good review. And if you don't, write it down. So very important here. I'm going to give you a couple of scriptures in Daniel. Daniel 6:28 says, so this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And it is needful for me to say this. This Darius is not the same Darius as Ezra and Nehemiah. And I will prove it to you in a minute. So you got 6:28. And then in Daniel 5:31, here's the crucial thing. We have in Daniel 5:31, this is the night that Belshazzar was slain. And 5:31 says, and Darius the Median. Now we know that Cyrus is the Persian, Darius the Median. There will be a Darius in the Persian kings. So don't confuse the two. And I'll take a minute after I give you two or three more scriptures to make sure we're talking about the seed, Darius, the seed of a Mede, not a Persian. Important that we keep these things separate. In Daniel 9:1, I'm going to give you a timeline as well. But in Daniel 9:1, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes. And this helps you to distinguish between which Darius we're talking about. This is the same Darius. You'll read about him in 11:1 and in 10:1. But in 11:1, Daniel 11:1, also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. In the third year of Cyrus, Daniel 10:1, in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel. So you can see that Darius the Mede and Cyrus are at the same time. They overlap. So Darius the Mede, the only thing that in records that we can find is a date of 539 to 529 that we know of absolutely. And here's where it gets important. I'm sorry to make you do so much page turning, but you put these notes down and you can then read them at your own leisure. Back there in Daniel 5, where I started reading, the famous writing on the wall, right? Daniel 5, beginning at verse 24. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written, and this is the writing that was written, Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of many. God hath numbered thy kingdom. Speaking of the Babylonian kingdom, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So it's very clear that we have Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian, and these two will overlap. Now, why am I telling you this? Because I tried to put the least amount of information to explain this, because you know me, I can pull out books and I can quote things, and at some point I think you'll go, okay, step away from the book. So the Nabonidus Chronicle, which is a clay tablet with 4 columns, published first in 1882 and then in 1924, reads something like this. In the month of Tirishitu, when Cyrus attacked the army of Akkad and Opis on the Tigris, the inhabitants of Akkad revolted, but Nabonidus massacred the confused inhabitants. On the 15th day, Sippar was seized without battle. Nabonidus fled. The 16th day, Gobryas, or Ugubaru, the governor of Gudium, and the army of Cyrus entered Babylon. Cyrus entered the city. Gobryas, his governor, installed sub-governors in Babylon. Gobryas, Gaburu are associated in many documents with Darius the Mede. And this is important because there's lots of confusion over this. This is one where I'm telling you, if you want to go check me out, go check me out. The more you dig into this, the more you'll find there is more evidence for what I'm saying. Not to be confused, by the way, with another man who sounds very similar to Gobryas and Gaburu, who is Ugubaru, who is another person who just sounds the same. So that was the Nabonidus Chronicle. The Pole text, which you can, if you want to dig, in Analectica Orientalia, Volume 8, published in 1933, you'll find something that reads like this. The 4th year of Cyrus, and there's a break because there's pieces missing, it's fragmented. The word of Gaburu is the 4th year of Cyrus, before Gubura, the governor of Babylon, and the land across the river. So what we know absolutely from multiple texts, and there is, I believe I counted 6 records of these, where everywhere Cyrus appears as entering into the land, this Gaburu or Gabiru is appointed as a governor. And sub-governors are appointed, which would explain how privileged Daniel and others got to have certain positions of prominence. So what we have is a hard number here. Towards the end of September 539 BC, the armies of Cyrus, along with the governor of Gudium, attacked Opis, defeated the Babylonians. That's one. It's not even a chart, it's just a whole bunch of information, so you could probably save yourself the trouble and write these things down, but if you're really so inclined to be that lazy, we'll make sure that they get put up somewhere so you can see them for a while. October 10th, Sippar was taken and Nabonidus fled. Cambyses, who is the son of Cyrus, starts living at Sippar. Now this is important because there's a chronology. You can find all of this. October 12th is the night that Belshazzar is slain. October 29th, Cyrus appears as liberator. Gaburu is appointed the new governor or satrap of Babylon. And these are, anywhere you look, you can find these. So when we talk about Darius the Mede in the Bible, If you go to the secular texts, and there are plenty of cuneiform, excellent documents. The problem is you have to read cuneiform. We'll talk about that later. I think at some point I got very obsessed about taking somebody else's word in translation, so I have enough to be able to decipher and read, because that to me was a necessity. That's all I'll say about that. So there's plenty of sources to check out, though, and plenty of translations which pretty much will give you this information if you're so inclined to look. So now I get into a little bit of talk here. The first thing we know is the date for Cyrus's entry, and the secular date has it at 539. So it's pretty safe to say, if you go by the Bible's chronological timeline given, it says in the first year of Cyrus, which is how 2 Chronicles 36:22 and Ezra 1 both spell out in the first year of Cyrus. That's not the first year of his absolute kingship. That's the first year of having overtaken Babylon, which brings you to 538. Now, let's do some work here. In Ezra, and you can read all of this, but the problem is Ezra is not in chronological order all the way through for us. It's not fluid, and neither is Nehemiah. And if you're wondering, why would I bother to do this? Because at some point when you piece these together, we'll do the same thing probably through Isaiah, through Jeremiah. It makes life so much easier. Now, in a perfect world, my dream would be to publish my own Bible, taking some of Dr. Scott's notes and some of his translations and some of mine, putting chronologies, not just somewhere at the beginning or the end, but before each book, giving nice margins, a couple of blank pages. I don't know. That's in a perfect world, right? I can dream about it at least. All right. So 2 Chronicles 36:22 and Ezra 1 through 4 tell us about the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, and the decree. In Ezra 2:2, we read, those that returned and those which went out of Babylon, those which came with Zerubbabel. This chronology is important to note, and I've said to you, I'm not going to be die-hard about this because it's hard to know if it was towards the end of one year and the beginning of another, but I put the date as 537, 536 for Zerubbabel, returning Ezra 2:2. Now, if you'll flip in your Bible to Nehemiah 7, this is going to require just a couple of hands and fingers here, all right? God put in mine heart to gather together the nobles and the rulers and the people, that they might be reckoned by genealogy. Why? Because for Jews, that was important. This is why the genealogy in the opening of the Gospels is so important. Matthew and Luke, to prove, to lead us back to. It was so important for these people. It's so important for us too, by the way, for so many other reasons. But they might be reckoned by genealogy, and I found a register of the genealogy of them which came up at the first, and found written therein, and these are the children of the province that went up out of the captivity, those that had been carried away, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away, and came again to Jerusalem and to Judah, everyone to his city, who came with Zerubbabel. And that's why I said these are the same accounts. These two lists are the same accounts. There are a few discrepancies. Somewhere here, I will tell you if you'd like to know, it's a good point to tell you about them. There's a few discrepancies. It's not even noteworthy, but if you're like me and you pick apart everything, and I do, in chapter 2 and verse 5, when it says the children of Ara, in Ezra 2:5, it says 775. And in Nehemiah 7:10, the children of Ara are 652. You'll find these small discrepancies. In fact, it'd be a good exercise for you to look them up. It's not that big of a deal. The reality is, and I believe this is the reality, if we understand the time between this list that was given to us, this is why these dates are important. If we understand that this list, which was possibly created when they returned, and we're giving the date of approximately 537, 536, somewhere in there. And Nehemiah, we can absolutely pinpoint that he returned about the year 445. Then you do the math between the year 537, 36, and 445. Enough time has passed that even to have found something written down and preserved is miraculous, number one. Number two, it tells me that somebody, over the course of time, either when Ezra's information was being transferred and written down in the form we currently have it, somewhere in between the numbers don't add up, and most of the people are the same, with the exception of the children of Magbish that occur in Ezra and they don't occur in Nehemiah. And yes, there are some other discrepancies, but nothing to, you're not going to say, oh, well, is this a wrong account? Just put it in your brain that there's a huge gap of time between the time that Nehemiah's finding this genealogy of the people who were written down and the time that it was actually written down. And if you factor that time and the miracle that as these people came back, things were preserved this way, then the few dates or the few numbers or the few people, it's not that big of a deal. We can know more or less and count this a very accurate rendering, even with the discrepancy of numbers. If time permits later on, because I could sit and take the next half hour to tell you about the missing people or the added people, you can do that in your own time if you have a couple of hours to drive yourself crazy. But what I want to point out is that if we're clear about this, and you see it's pretty much the same thing, those which came with Zerubbabel, Ezra 2:2, those who came with Zerubbabel, Nehemiah 7:7, then what I want you to see is why I explained to you the reason why Nehemiah would have taken the time to, what I believe undoubtedly is read this document, which leads us into all the people being gathered in the street to hear the preacher Ezra open the book of the law and read it. Just very convenient, by the way, and it's also very convenient that it is at the time of tabernacles. Now, are there other issues in this between these two books that are hard to reckon? Yes. Or reconcile? Yes. But nothing that's so beyond the pale. If you consider the time difference between Ezra, the writing of Ezra, and Nehemiah, and the writing of Nehemiah. Okay, let's move on. So, we have the people that return, Ezra 2:2, and I'm going to kind of rely a little bit on Ezra right now to give you a chronology, because the accounts in Ezra are happening before what's recorded in Nehemiah. We know that. Nehemiah arrives much later than both the account of Zerubbabel arriving and then subsequently the arrival of Ezra. It's a little bit kooky to have the main person who is supposedly the book is named after arrive halfway through the book, but that's what happens. All right, in 537, 536, it says, in the 7th month they built the altar and offered sacrifices. That's Ezra 3, 1 through 7. The 7th month was come, and the children of Israel were in the cities. The people gathered themselves together as one man to Jerusalem. Doesn't that sound familiar? The opening of the Nehemiah 8 sounds a little bit like that, but don't say, well, it's just a mere copy, because something different happens in Ezra 3 versus what happens in Nehemiah 8. In Ezra 3, 7th month, all the people were gathered. It says they were gathered together as one man to Jerusalem. And then Joshua, the son of Josadak, and his brethren, the priests, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and his brethren, they builded the altar of God, the God of Israel, to offer burnt offerings thereon, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. Now it seems clear. This is what you have to be careful about. It seems clear that in Nehemiah 8, Ezra's going to arrive, and they put up a pulpit for him, and he's standing in the center of the town or the square, and he's reading the law, and people are hearing this for the first time. But I want you to imagine that much time has passed between the Chronicle of Ezra and Nehemiah, the writing of the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. So, the one thing we can know that we're dealing with a right timeline is, and I mentioned this, I'm going to jump slightly out of sequence, but we know absolutely, I'll get down to the dates because I've written them out specifically, I've put them out plainly, but we know that the ministry of Haggai and Zechariah occurs in the year 520. And we know that that happened while they were into building the temple and encountered problems, and the building stopped for a time, and then their ministries, Haggai and Zechariah, began to encourage the people, and they returned to build. And we know that's in 520. And we're now talking about the year 537, 36 or so. Okay? So, 535, the temple rebuilding gets started and stopped. Let's read Ezra 3:8, because now we're going to have some hard facts here. It says, now in the second year of their coming into the house of God at Jerusalem. Let's stop right there. So whatever date you start at, you've got to go back 2 years. So when I said 537, 536, I'm leaning towards that outward date of 537 to say 2 years later, the second year of their coming unto the house of God. That means some remnant of that house was left. It wasn't completely burned to the ground. Something was left when they say the second year of their coming unto the house of God at Jerusalem in the second month. And then here we go. Began Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Joshua the son of Josadak and the remnant of their brethren, the priests and the Levites, and all they that were come out of the captivity unto Jerusalem, appointed the Levites from 20 years old upward, and set forward the work of the house of the Lord. So we have a rebuilding point, which I've put at 535, and a starting and stopping. Well into Ezra 4, the work will stop. And I have not been presenting Ezra to you, I've been presenting Nehemiah, but I'm trying to show a chronology of things. You can go back and read this on your own. Dr. Scott taught on this. There's teaching that plays on the network. There are messages in pulpits. It's like a treasure hunt. You've got to go find it. I'm not going to do it all for you. All right, so we know Ezra 4, there is a stop in the building, in the restoration of God's house. We know that. Now, a crucial date is going to happen here, which is the date I inserted just earlier, which is the date of 530 of Cyrus. So we know Cyrus dies in 530. He is killed at the hands of Queen Tamiris, who I have a book, a small, very short article I'll read to you so I make sure you heard it from a book. You know, go, is she making this stuff up? All right. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that you can read about. And she's actually going to be very important, and her people will be very important for another study eventually that we'll get to. So it's all these file cards you'll have to put somewhere for some other day. All right. Cyrus dies in 530, and his son, who was living at a conquered city, palace, becomes king. In between Cambyses' reign, if you will. There's some other stuff that's going to happen. There's some interesting things. If you follow the chronology of the Persian kings, and I said this to you, depending on where you get your information from, the Behistun rock or the Cyrus cylinder, some of the different tablets, the dates and people may vary. And this is where you have to just put on your thinking cap and find the common denominator and work from there. That's just the way it is. So 530 Cambyses is now in charge of Persia and all of the lands. But here's what's most important. If you know why I included Darius the Mede, which would be some years earlier, is to say that there was still a governing body. Up until the year at least 529, there was still a governing body of Medes in Babylon. And this is important when people discuss why didn't everybody go back at one time or who was in control. We know certain people were put in certain places, and I'm trying to give you the dates so we can kind of make a timeline. So Cambyses is in power, and there's also another son of Cyrus who will try and usurp the throne, who I've referred to. He'll come a few years later. Gumata, also known as False Smerdis or Bardiya. He reigns for a few months and then he's out of the picture. By 522, these are important dates. By 522, Darius the First is king. We're not talking about Darius the Mede that I referred to. This is why I'm distinguishing these people. By 522, Darius the First is the king, and he issues a decree in Ezra 6. And when you read in Ezra 6, it says, "Then Darius the king." And you may say, well, this is silly. I know this, but you'd be surprised at how many people get confused about which Darius are we talking about. So here, we can know something. We can know that this 6th chapter is taking place during the reign of Darius. And during Darius's reign, actually in 521, Darius will divide his empire into 20 provinces. 520 comes the prophecies of Haggai and Zechariah. So I want you to see what happens here. The 6th chapter of Ezra. Then Darius the king made a decree. A search was made in the house of the rolls where the treasure were laid up in Babylon. There was found at Achmetha, which should be Ecbatana, I think, or it's a similar name, should be that. In the palace that is in the province of the Medes, a roll, and therein the record was written in the 1st year of Cyrus. So he had to go back to find the decree that Cyrus had issued. And that decree, we know, is what opens in the opening chapter of Ezra. So it's almost like a reinforcement of the dates we've already established. Now, if you want to follow along, you may just say, well, okay, these are dates I can know. When you get into Haggai, when you read, inevitably you encounter his dates and they're crystal clear. Haggai opens in the 2nd year of Darius the king. When you understand the timeline and you understand in the time that Darius ruled as king, you know what time Haggai is prophesying. We know that Haggai was prophesying these particular prophecies in 520. And what did I say? Darius started in 522. So you find these things confirming and giving you a very good timeline. So when you read Haggai, Haggai's first prophecy is in the first day of the 6th month. And then, hold that thought for a minute. Ezra 5. Remember I told you it's not in order. Ezra 5 tells us that the temple is rebuilt. That's why I told you it's not in order. Do you see what I'm saying? It's self-evident, but it helps to just put these things in line. Then when you go back to read it and you've made these notes, you can read it in that order, and it almost is like you get to see the whole, it's like looking at the box of the puzzle with all the pieces and you see the nice picture and you go, oh, right? Okay. Sorry, I couldn't help that. So Ezra 5 is they rebuilt the temple. And what comes right before Ezra 5 is Haggai preaching on the 24th day of the 6th month saying, build, right? Then immediately after that, Haggai prophesies or preaches again the 21st day of the 7th month. And if you want this, the following month, in the 8th month, Zechariah, it says, in the 2nd year of Darius, of King Darius. So we know these are at the same time in their chronological order. Then you've got in the 9th month, the 24th day, Haggai. Haggai's 3rd and 4th messages, that would be Haggai 2:10 through 23. Then in the 11th month, you've got Zechariah's visions. Now, if you write all this down, you go check this out, and you line all this up, it seems like that'd be very disturbing to read that way, but when you read it that way, it's pretty incredible. Okay, now we're at the point where they've been building, they've rebuilt. Now we're pretty close to the year 516. And why do I say that? Because Ezra 6:15, and this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. Don't you love that? He started in 522 minus 6 brings you to 516, more or less. Don't go what? These are not like don't go. These are hard dates. We don't know if it was the beginning of the year, the end of the year, so these are approximate dates. Don't say, well, I read somewhere this, because anybody who says it's exactly that, we don't know on which calendar, except for the dates when they give us the month like Adar or something, then we know absolutely. But I'm giving you this. Don't say anything beyond that. It's a pretty good outline. That's all I can tell you. By 515, how did this happen? I don't know, but we were in the 12th month, the year 516, the 3rd day. Temple's completed, Ezra 6:15, correct? The 6th year of Darius the king. And then just a few verses later, in the same chapter of Ezra, Ezra 6:19, it says, and the children of the captivity kept the Passover upon the 14th day of the 1st month. So from Ezra 6:15 to 6:19, we've just jumped into the new year, which is the Passover. All in just a few verses. Okay, that sounds pretty clear. If you're interested in history, there's lots of things going on in history between what's not chronicled here, but the battle of the invasion of the Persians invading Greece happens in 480. And then all of a sudden, you have the return of Ezra in Ezra's book, right? That is chronicled for you in Ezra 7 and 8. Now, here's where we know the timeline of Ezra's return by the things that are going to be in here. So Ezra 7, now after these things in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, tells you we have a new king, much later time. And we know that Ezra arrives in Jerusalem after a 4-month trip. He arrives in 458. We know that, accompanied by some 1,754 men. Not too much, not many, as opposed to that first wave. And there are some, because if you read Ezra, there are some that will argue that Sheshbazzar, who is in the opening passages of Ezra, some will argue, and some have argued, and that the case won't hold up if you're doing this chronology. Sheshbazzar cannot be Nehemiah. We know Nehemiah comes much later. Sheshbazzar, I've always thought could have possibly been Zerubbabel, but that's a problem because Zerubbabel was born in in captivity. So there was really no need to give him another name versus, say, like Daniel, who was given another name while he was in captivity. So it's entirely possible that Sheshbazzar is somebody else, but he appears and he disappears just as quickly. God has a couple of those people in his book. Don't you find that kind of annoying? Okay, we're almost there, kind of. So after these things, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, the son of Sariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Shallum, the son of Zadok, the son of right? Okay, of all those sons, to prove, by the way, this part of his genealogy is given to show that he can trace his lineage back to Aaron, the high priest. This is, if you look at it, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the chief priest, the high priest. This Ezra went up from Babylon. I love the fact that just in a few verses, God thought it was so important, somebody thought it was so important to make sure that we know that Ezra could trace his line, his lineage right back to Aaron. Ezra went up from Babylon. There's a scribe, the law of Moses, which the Lord God of Israel had given. And the king granted him all his requests according to the hand of the Lord his God upon him. There went up some of the children of Israel, of the priests, of the Levites, singers, and porters, and of the Nethinims unto Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. Now, this is one I'm not going to tell you can be straightened out perfectly clear. I have a chronology, and the problem is that there are two different people, Artaxerxes and Xerxes, which people have said are the same, and they are not. We can know definitively that there are two different kings. Here is the dilemma. If you try and fit Ezra and Ezra's return into the first king, you end up with not enough space for the king that Nehemiah was serving, and equally problematic if you're trying to line up the chronology of of Esther. So this Artaxerxes, it says in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king, it's very important that you don't get mistaken to confuse the kings. There was a king ruling. I may have good notes here, and I may not. And I may not. But note to self to bring you a list of the kings so you can see it for yourself. But at this point, you'll just have to take my word, or you can go look it up for yourselves. It's rather confusing, but this is not. The 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. And he came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. Now, this tells you how long his trip was. Upon the 1st day of the 1st month began he to go up from Babylon. And the 1st day of the 5th month he came to Jerusalem, 4 months. And then, we can read the decree that was given. This is the copy of the letter that King Artaxerxes gave unto Ezra the priest, the scribe, even a scribe of the words of the commandment of the Lord, and of his statutes to Israel. Artaxerxes, king of kings, unto Ezra the priest, a scribe of the law of God of heaven. I make a decree, and so you can read all of that, and you can see that this decree was giving Ezra the right and license to return. Now, if we put Ezra's return at 458, then there's no problem with Nehemiah 8 and Ezra arriving and reading the law. There's no problem at all, because that's in close proximity. The problem is when people refuse to read and put this in chronological order and think that the book opens with Ezra, when Ezra only really appears and is first mentioned in the 7th chapter. And he has to be in this time frame. Why? Because we know that the difference between Ezra's arrival and then Nehemiah's arrival, and the time that Nehemiah will stay and serve as governor for 12 years, and then he will return to the palace. And these are all important pieces of information, because it means that when Nehemiah in his time returned, the reign of the certain king was still in place. Now we know from a certain time there is a cutoff period in Persian history because of Alexander the Great. People have tried to push this book and its history much later, and that is impossible. And the reason why it's impossible is we know that the canon closes with Malachi, and everybody who reads the Bible will know that this book of Malachi has to be put somewhere about the year 430. Maybe we're going to say at the far end 400, but I think that's even way too late. And I've read chronologies where they've had Malachi in the year 500, and I've said, well, that's not possible either. And the reason why that's not possible is because that would have passed the time that I'm referring to of the temple being rebuilt, and the issues that Malachi was dealing with, where people were organized offerings, and it wouldn't coincide. So you've got to line all this up. So forgive me if I'm, going all over the place, but make these notes, line it up for yourself. You're going to see it makes perfect sense. So we have Ezra returning, and it is in chapter 8 of Ezra that we have this chronology, or this list of people that return with him. These are the chief fathers. This is the genealogy of them that went up with me. There's the first time you have that personal with me. Ezra's now writing with me from Babylon in the reign of Artaxerxes the king. Now this is why I kind of go, it's so yummy. I love this part of the Bible here. So if you want to get, if you want to start reading the people that returned with him, you'll understand that a generation or so has passed, maybe even a generation and a half. I read down this list here of people: the sons of Phinehas and Gershom, the sons of Ithamar, Daniel, the sons of David, Hattush, and the sons of Shechaniah, and the sons of Parash. So you keep reading, and you get down to one name in verse 10, and the sons of Shelomith. Now I was reading this, and I went, ding, because Shelomith, do you remember where we saw Shelomith? Does anybody remember that name? Nah, maybe not. I get excited for the small things here. All right. Son of a gun. All right. We saw Shelomith in 1 Chronicles when I was reading about Zerubbabel. And the line that descends from Zerubbabel, Meshullam, Hananiah, and Shelomith, their sister. So we can know that Shelomith is a descendant of Zerubbabel. Hello. So when we're reading this, we're seeing it's the next generation of people. So if you're saying, well, I'm still not sure that you're giving me these dates, well, and you can verify with at least 50% of the names in Ezra 8 that these are children of people who were mentioned at an earlier time. These are children that perhaps stayed back a time. Don't think that everybody returned all at once, because even when you read the record of Daniel, you see that Daniel did not return immediately. We can know that by certain things in Daniel. So, okay, onward we go. Nehemiah. Let's go to the beginning of Nehemiah. So, Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, came to pass in the month of Chislev, the 20th year, as I was in Shushan, the palace. Now, this is important information for us. Why? Because those people who will read, where was Esther? In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne in his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the palace. Now, there's other information in Esther that I could just keep building on, but I'm not teaching out of Esther right now, and I want to try and keep everything narrowed down. I just want you to kind of put a fact check there that there's certain things that we can know will be the same place. So chronologically, if we were trying to put things together, we'd see where Esther fits into this too. Focus, stay focused. All right. I'm trying. Okay, so we have Nehemiah. We've got a timeline for him, and he makes his plea. It says here in the 2nd chapter, it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king. And he's the king's cupbearer. And we know that at this point, as he receives favor from the king, he receives letters. And when he goes, who goes with him? The king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. That's who Nehemiah goes with. Now, there may have been a few other folks traveling with him, but it's not as though that there's a big wave of people that return. We don't read that chronicle. And it appears as though the people that we read who rebuilt the wall, who worked on the wall, seems as though those people were already there. So that's where, if you're interested in cross-referencing, you'd have to go back and read some of the folks that returned with Ezra as well to make a comparative of the people to see that there's some common denominators there. But that's another point. All right. Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem in 445. We know that he is governor there for 12 years. How do we know that? Nehemiah 5:14. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year even unto the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, that is 12 years, I and my brethren have not eaten the bread of the governor. So we know he was there at least 12 years. And again, we're not jumping to the end of his 12 years. We know that he arrived in 445. We know that they built the wall. The wall was finished in an impossible 52 days, right? That occurred in 615. That's why I told you, you've got to read sometimes, and it's somewhat out of order. When it says, so the wall was finished in the 20th and 5th day of the month of Elul in 52 days, right? So we're still working on the timeline here. Let's fast forward to Ezra's preaching, because this will give you some indicator of why I said nothing is really in order. You've got the people that are chronicled, the second, we'll call it the repetition of the genealogy that occurs in Nehemiah 7, and assume that the children of some of these people that are mentioned, of the children of these children and their children perhaps, are the ones that are currently there as Ezra comes in onto the scene. They're gathered as one man into the street that was before the water gate. I love the fact that the Word of God is going to be read before the water gate. There's something so great about that. Just these little tiny things where you just say, well, they could have been by the dung gate, right? But they were by the water gate. Sorry, God. And just, we have an interesting record again of this time frame that happened in the 7th month. And then we have the Feast of Tabernacles occurring. And we could keep going on this chronology. My point is very simple, that if you've got at least these pieces put together, you've got a good amount of the framework to make sense of what you're looking at. You're going to find that there's going to be some later chapters to Nehemiah that don't seem to make sense because they come earlier. I'm not even there yet. I'm just going to leave these. I've given you the framework of enough information on what I've done to put things in order. I hope you've been taking notes. All right, that wasn't a nice laugh. What else do I want to share with you? If you've got your Bible open to Nehemiah 7, I photocopied the bulk of verses 8 through 63 so that I could, yeah, you're going, ooh, so that I could write, because I went back to translate all of the names, compare the numbers, I did all of that. So, okay, there's some of them that you listen to Dr. Scott, that's probably the first one everybody knows, the children of Perosh as the children of the flea. And isn't that wonderful that the list starts like that? And by the way, it's a very interesting list. It's not just that, but if you go down the list, and I might as well do this now, and you can just probably be better to scribble it on a piece of paper, because I don't think they're all going to fit in your Bible. And then you'll do what I do, which is I try to write small, and it's all over the place. I'm trying to write, and it looks like, well, what language is that? So the children of Perosh is the children of the flea. The children of Shephatiah, whom the Lord judges. The children of Ara, traveler. Now this is a complex thing to translate. So Pahath Moab I left alone because there's 3 different ways to translate it. But the children of Jeshua and the children of Joab, Jeshua from salvation and Joab from Jehovah his father. The children of Elam, the children of the highlands. Don't you love these names? The children of Zatu, sprout. The children of Zakkai, pure. The children of Binui, which in your margin might read Bani, which is building. If you took Hebrew with me, you'll recognize that word from the terminology we use, binyanim. Somebody asked, when are you going to start Hebrew? And I said, soon. I'm like, God, my watch doesn't work. The children of Bebai, paternal. I guess if you came to town and you didn't know too much about anything, you could just say, hey, I'm a kid of Asgad, right? Because they had 2,322 kids. That means strong in fortune. The children of Adonikim, or Cam, my Lord has arisen. It's a very interesting name, some of them. The children of Bigvai, husbandmen. They were also busy. If you think about it, having over 2,000 kids in captivity. Whew. The children of Adin, ornament. The children of Ater, which Ater is to be shut up, to be closed in. The children of Hashum, rich. The children of Bizai, victory. The children of Harif, or it says in my margin, Jorah, which is autumn. The children of Gibeon, which is a hill. And then you notice suddenly it changes from the children of, to the men of Bethlehem and the men of Netophah. It's kind of interesting that it changes from that. I always thought when I read this, both obviously from the source, reading from the source in Ezra, that to go from the children of to say the men of had to be a group of people, recognizing parts of the townspeople or the important people, the townspeople, but not all, because look at how few the numbers are. The men of Bethlehem and the men of Netophah, 188. And the men of Anathoth, 128. These are interesting places. They have great relevance. It's not. I don't think this is just a random thing. If you look at it, I mentioned this in my message. We know how important Bethlehem is. Netophath, you'll find, is a town that is attached to one of David's mighty men. And the men of Anathoth, another important place in terms of Jeremiah and his buying a field for his inheritance. That is a very strong message that these people returned. The men of Beth Asmaveth, and I did translate this, the house of the strong to death. That's interesting. The men of Kirjath Jearim, the city of woods, of Shiphrah and of Beeroth, the village and wells. The men of Ramah and Gaba, interesting, Ramah, womb, and Gaba, height. The men of Michmas, laid up treasure. The men of Bethel and Ai, house of God, and the place called a heap. The men of the other Nebo, that is to translate prophet, by the way. The children of the other Elam. Don't you like that it specified the other, the other, yes. The children of the other highlands. The children of Harim, consecrated, and the children of Jericho, which strangely enough is translated the city of moon god. Not sure why. The children of Lod, Hadid, and Ono, strife, sharp, and strong. The children of Sina, those are the children of Thorny. Boy, and Thorny was busy, by the way, because Thorny had 3,930 children in captivity. We could colloquially do something with that, but it's family time, so we'll leave that one alone. Excuse me, that's just the carnal mind at work. The priests, that'll settle in a little bit later. The priests, the children of Jediah, the house of Jeshua. We know that Jediah is whom Jehovah praises. And the children of Immer. Immer means talkative. The children of Pashur, safety, and Harim, consecrated. And of the Levites, the children of Jeshua, of Kadmiel. These are interesting names, of Hodava. So Joshua, salvation, Kadmiel, eternity of God, and Hodva, praises of Jah. Of the singers, the children of Asaph, collector. Of the porters, the children of Shalom, which is retribution. The children of Ater, again, shut up, as it to be shut in. The children of Talmon, oppressed. The children of Akub, insidious. Imagine that, being the children of insidious. The children of Hatita, exploration. The children of Shobai, taking captive. Of the Nethinims, the children of Ziha, Hashufa, and of Teboath. That is drought, nakedness, and rings. Not all in the same place, I guess. Of the children of Keros, Sia, and Padon, that is comb, counsel, and redemption. Of the children of Labana, Hagaba, and Shalamai, that is white. The children of Locust, and peaceful. The slumgullion of people. And I really did say dysfunctional, probably. Hopefully their names are not associated with some quality of their persons, yes? The children of Hanan, the children of Gidel, and the children of Gehar, that is merciful, gigantic, and whom the Lord cares for. And the children of Rhea, the children of Rezin, and Nekoda, stable, hiding place. There's a repeated name here. The children of Gazam, and the children of Uzzah, and Phasia, eating, strength, and lame. The children of Besai, Neumann, the children of Nephishim, which is habitation, victory, habitation, and numerous. The children of Bakbuk, which means waste. Of the children of Hakfa, of the children of Harar, bent and fever, or this is going to be very bizarre, the children of Bazluth, number 54, or Bazluth, which is making naked. The children of Mahida and the children of Harsha, which is joining together, and artificer. The children of Barkos and the children of Sisera and the children of Tama, which is painter, field of battle, and laughter. Neziah of Hatifa, that is pure and seized. And the children of Solomon's servants, the children of Sotai, which is deviator, of Sophereth, which is scribe, the children of Perida, which is grain, the children of Jaela. Well, you're going to like this one. I have no idea where this came from, but the best I could come up with is that Jaela means female ibex. You know, the horned animal. Don't ask me, because I really don't know. Of Darkon, the children of Darkon, scatterer, and of Gidel, gigantic, the children of Shephatiah, whom the Lord judges, of Hatil, quivering, The children of Poshereth of Zebaim, sharing, oh boy, this is good, gazelles. The children of Ammon, workmen. And then there are these which went up also from Tel Mila, which is the hill of salt, Tel Haresha, the hill of wood, Cherub, which is guarding, Adon, strong, and Emer, again, talkative. The children of Deliah, whom Jehovah has freed, the children of Tobiah, the Lord is good, and children of Nekoda, herdsmen. The children of Habiah, the Lord hides, the children of Koz, thorn, and the children of Barzillai, iron. Anyway, what's important there is you see that there's a hodgepodge of names, and then something that is not super visible. I always wanted to do this. It's just finding the right time to do this. Seems like something very banal, like, what do you do with your spare time? Oh, I look up strange names in Hebrew. Do they not put people away for this? All right. We're in Nehemiah 7. And in where it says verse 62, and the children of Deliah, the children of Tobiah, the children of Nekoda, 642, it does not read. It reads like this, but there's a problem with the reading, and I'll tell you what it is. And the following, beginning at verse 61, the following came up from the towns of Tel Mila, Tel Harsha, Kerub, Adon, Imer, but they could not show that their families were descended from Israel. The descendants of Deliah, Tobiah, Nekoda, 642, and from among the priests, the descendants of, and it says, these search for their family records. So there's some 642 people. I'm not sure that it reads the way this is translated properly, but there are 642 people in the combination of the children of Deliah, Tobiah, the children of Nekoda, and when it says of the priests, in some combination of these people, between the children of Deliah, Tobiah, Nekoda, and of the priests, the children of Habiah, Koz, and Barzillai, of these that could not prove that they belonged or they had part and parcel of this company. It says they searched for their family records, but they could not find them, so they were excluded from the priesthood. That's that last group of people I read as unclean. Now, this is another hint when we read of that you're rereading the record of Ezra 2, because here, when it says in the Tirshatha is the governor. It should not be understood here that the Tirshatha in this particular chronicle that I just read is Nehemiah. Although he will be referred to later as the Tirshatha, we might say that the Tirshatha, who was the governor of the people at the time, would have been Zerubbabel. So that's a name. The Tirshatha is another name for governor. But we know that that wasn't Nehemiah because Nehemiah is reading the list of the people. So I want to make that distinction. There's these subtle things. Last but not least, because there's so many things in here, and I say, I should point this out. They're just notes for people who study the Bible. This is not going to make or break your faith. It's not going to fix or solve anything. But it's very interesting that this particular verse, 65, and the Tirshatha, the governor, said unto them that they should not eat of the most holy things till there stood up a priest with Urim and Thummim. And as I said, that's the last reference in the Old Testament to the Urim and Thummim, but truthfully, that's the last reference out of Ezra 2. This is just the chronicle being repeated. Why is that important? Because if I were teaching on this, we would talk about all the things that were carried away into Babylon, and the list of things between Ezra, specifically in Ezra, that we know that were returned for the worship. And it's one of those anomalies that we often, people have discussed this, why the ark was not returned, And for me, there's this wonderful thing that God made sure that the ark was not returned. When it disappeared, it disappeared. Why? Because we know that the ark represents Christ, and the contents of the ark, the tables of the law unbroken, Aaron's rod that budded, and the pot of manna, which to me symbolically could never return. If it did, the people would have been worshiping the ark, and we would have never been able to see Christ and to look to Christ. People, this is our nature. We want to touch, we want to feel, we want to venerate that which we can actually put our hands on. It's much more difficult to connect with that unseen than, of course, the seen, which requires faith. But here again, the Urim and the Thummim, that's a completely different discussion of the two stones that when you read in, I believe it's Exodus 28, when it talks about the breastplate with the 12 stones for the tribes, and these two stones that would have possibly fit in what the King James calls ouches, not pouches, but ouches, ouch. Probably one white and one black stone. Nobody really knows exactly, except that many times it seems like the answers when people came before the priest who had the Urim and the Thummim, it seems as though they were yes and no answers, which seems a little bit strange. I always just point these things out. Sorry to go on these diatribes, but we're here, so I might as well. It seems a little bit strange because the Lord God spoke to Moses and then gives him the instructions for all of these things that the high priest will wear. And it seems like the high priest may have, at least in Aaron's case, heard the voice of God or the instructions. And suddenly we have the high priest possessing these stones where people would come and they would inquire, and it seems like a yes, yes, or no, no answer is given, nothing beyond that. And some have questioned, why did this disappear? And I really think, again, it's much like the ark. I don't think it's an accident that the Urim and the Thummim, if you look at their Hebrew, the letters, that the Urim and the Thummim are the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which to me represent Christ being the Alpha and the Omega, the ability to give light and discernment, which the Urim and the Thummim gave. I don't believe in over-spiritualizing, but I believe all of these things that disappeared for a reason. They disappeared in preparation for Christ, which they really didn't disappear. They were always the type of, and he is the reality, the substance, the verity. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. My question was, it's kind of a cliffhanger because it's inserted here in Nehemiah, but we know when we go back to Ezra and the chronicle being put out, we know that the high priest of that time is Joshua, the son of Josadak, which is also the high priest, which is chronicled, of course, in Haggai's prophecies and whatnot. But we don't know is whether or not he possessed the Urim or the Thummim. So it's a cliffhanger. These 642 people are awaiting their fate to find out whether or not they can, not all of these were priests, but the ones that were, whether or not they could participate in need of the holy things, which means the portion that would remain, that would be held back for the priest to consume, whether or not they could consume that portion. That's a cliffhanger right there. Are we going to get food or not? But anyway, some things I guess God just says, okay, we'll leave that hanging there for a little while, and maybe no one will come back to it. God's the ultimate dangler, so he leaves us with a little bit of a dangling episode here, both for Ezra and Nehemiah. But anyway, that's just some of the oddities. There's some other oddities in here that I've contemplated. Should I disturb you with? Should we even look at? Because somebody might say, well, these are just very small details. But to me, that's the fascination. You can never exhaust the details, whether it's the names, which I don't think knowing the names of the people in the chronicle, it's not as though it's going to be life-changing here. But I'll tell you where it will make a difference when you get to the folks that were standing by Ezra when he stands up to read. Those names really have some, I'd say some relevance. It kind of makes a statement.
Come on.